Hey, welcome to the Purple Positivity Podcast for May the 30th, 2018. I am your host, the amazingly adorable Rebecca Thistle, podcasting to you live-ish from my kitchen/dining room table in my apartment, which I call Jeffrey Thistlework. Oh my god! New Kimmy Schmidt today! Hooray! Okay. Also, it's my dad's birthday. Fuck. That means I gotta call him. Happy birthday, Daddy. Just saying. No, I love my dad. I really do. We have our issues that we never talk about, but I do love my dad. I can't not love my dad because we basically have the same personality. Actually, it's really interesting. Growing up, I didn't really know my dad's dad that well, and then 2 years ago, he calls me up out of the blue, and he's like, hey, you want to come visit me? And I was like, hey, yeah, absolutely. So I went and I spent a week with him, and at the end of that week, I went, you know, I can't even believe this. I always thought that my personality was just like my dad's. Turns out I'm my grandfather's granddaughter. Like, oh my gosh. It freaked me out, but like in a cool way, you know? I mean, my grandfather wasn't perfect. I'll be the first one to tell you. Anyways, randomness. So it's my dad's birthday, and Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt is on Netflix. Yes. So, guilt ferrets. Oh, that always sounds like so random, right? But I'm going somewhere. If you listen to this show regularly, first of all, sorry. Second of all, you know that I am a huge fan of the Iron Druid Chronicles. And if you listen to my other podcast, the Purple Lit Nerd podcast, you know that I'm currently covering the Iron Druid Chronicles on that show. So, until a couple of days ago, I'd only ever listened to the novels and then the collection of short stories called Besieged. I hadn't listened to any of the novellas. So, but there's one in particular that was released between the 4th and 5th books in the series. And so I went and I got it on Audible, and I spent the weekend listening to it, which seems so stupid to me because it's only like 3 hours long. And I mean, I've listened to entire novels in less time. It took me 48 hours to get through a 3-hour audiobook. But that was mostly my fault because I at any given time I tried to keep like 5 different conversations going on in various apps and on my phone and stuff. So like I'd have to pause it so that I could send a message, and then the person I sent a message to would respond back instantly, and then at the same time as somebody on like Facebook. And it was awesome. Like I love doing like that, but it cut into my audiobook listening time. So, but I did finish it, and then I was re-listening to it yesterday at work, and Atticus has a fondness for talking about guilt ferrets. That seems to be his favorite metaphor for how guilt feels, and he is so right about it. Guilt ferrets wrap themselves around your neck and tickle at you and bite you and scratch you and basically make a nuisance of themselves. And they never stop. And they're bastards. Guilt ferrets are bastards. So in this novella, which is called 2 Ravens and 1 Crow, he is talking to the Morrigan, the Celtic chooser of the slain death goddess, who's she's a very interesting character, to say the least. But because on the surface, because of how human belief in her divinity has created her, she's kind of a sociopathic bitch. Like, let's be honest. So they get into a conversation about guilt and guilt ferrets, and the Morgan makes some really good points about how guilt is the most useless emotion to have. It's regret and recrimination for things over which you have no control. And it's like eating ashes for breakfast. She gives this whole speech, and I'm trying to remember it all. And if this were a professional podcast and I were an audio editing wizard and awesome at this, I would have the audio right here, and I just, from the audiobook, and I'd be like, oh, I will isolate this speech from the Morgan, and I will hit the button, and wah-la-la-la-la, it will go. But this isn't. I'm not. So here we go. But she gives this whole speech about how guilt is what keeps the, powerful, and the laity subservient to the moral, ethical code that the clergy wants to perpetuate, and yada, yada, yada. And she makes a lot of really valid points. But then Atticus O'Sullivan, my fictional soulmate, he says, yeah, but if I don't feel guilt, then that makes me a sociopath. And the Morgan goes, oh, are you calling me a sociopath? And she starts getting a little about that. And he's like, okay. Okay. Yes, but I wasn't saying it to be sweet. Alright? It's a really interesting scene, but it got me thinking about guilt. And I think what I'm about to say isn't something that I haven't already said on this show in the past. Is guilt has its place. There's another thing that in the fourth book of the series, there's another thing that Atticus says in his sort of, narrative, internal dialogue type thing, about a character dies and another character feels responsible for it, and he's expressing sympathy for that. He's like, yeah, I know how she feels. She's beating herself over the head with a club called If Only, or something like that. And that's how guilt is. Well, guilt and regret. But I think if you don't feel guilt, then yeah, it makes you a sociopath. It makes you a somewhat of an automaton. I lived for a while, about a year, with someone who I guarantee you feels no guilt for what she did to me. We're talking verbal abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse. She stood by and watched me be physically abused Man, it's 4:30 in the morning here, and my grammar just went out the window. And I guarantee you she doesn't feel any guilt or regret over it. I think the only regret she has is that I finally started wearing my ovaries on the outside and left. And I never want to be like that. And so feeling guilt assures me that I am not like her. So guilt has its place. Guilt ferrets have their place. But you can't let that control your life. Because another thing that the Morrigan says in her speech is guilt is the catalyst or something to suicide. And I ain't going that way. I mean, here in recent months, yeah, well, maybe not the past couple of months, thanks to someone. But, you know, at the very least, since October, late October, you know, I've had my moments of being passively suicidal. I let the guilt ferrets get to me. But feeling guilty, that's part of being human. And you can't let the guilt control you. So how do you get rid of the guilt ferrets? And I think it just ultimately comes down to a designated amount of time to let them get to you. You know? They start tickling and biting and wrapping themselves around your neck and being a nuisance. You say, all right, but just for a little while. And then, I mean, maybe, you know, just a few minutes or, you know, whatever. And then just say, all right, that's enough. Go away, guilt ferrets. And it's so, again, it's never as easy as it sounds, you know? You got the guilt ferrets, and you say, okay, I'm done with the guilt ferrets. They're going to come back. They're going to start biting you again. I get it. Guilt ferrets that's what they do. They're bastards. But, you know, you have to play like whack-a-mole with those guilty thoughts. Except it wouldn't be whack-a-mole, it'd be whack-a-ferret. Oh, gosh. I just had Weasel Stomping Day by Weird Al start playing in my head. Oh, God. That sounds much more hilarious than it really is. But, you know, yeah, you kind of got to do some